was a calm Tuesday morning in a small diner on the edge of a quiet Virginia town. The sky was still pale, painted with the soft colors of dawn, and the air outside was cool and clean after a night of light rain. Inside the diner, the smell of coffee filled the room, mixed with the sound of sizzling bacon and the soft clink of cups being placed on saucers. It was the kind of morning that made people slow down and take a breath. The kind of morning where life felt gentle. At the corner booth, near the window that looked out over the sleepy Main Street, sat Henry Collins, a 76-year-old veteran who had seen more than most could imagine. He came to this diner almost every morning, rain or shine. He liked the routine, the quiet company of familiar faces, the warm cup of black coffee, and the friendly nods from locals who respected him. Henry wasn't a man who spoke much, but when he did, his words carried weight. He had a calm presence, the kind that made people feel safe without even knowing why. His old army jacket hung loosely on his shoulders, the patches slightly faded but still proud symbols of his service. There was a small American flag on his sleeve and a name tag that read, Collins. His hands, strong but wrinkled, held the morning newspaper, the same one he had been reading for decades. He'd read every section carefully, from politics to sports, though he often shook his head at how the world had changed. The waitress, a kind woman named Lydia, walked over with a warm smile. She had worked there for years and treated Henry like family. "Morning, Mr. Collins," she said cheerfully, pouring his coffee. "The usual?" Henry smiled softly. "Yes, ma'am, the usual." He always ordered the same: scrambled eggs, 2 strips of bacon and a side of toast. Lydia chuckled and said, "You're as steady as they come." Henry laughed lightly, a gentle sound that fit his nature. "Old habits die hard," he said. The diner wasn't busy yet. Just a few early risers sat scattered around, a truck driver sipping his second cup of coffee, a young woman typing on her laptop, and an old couple quietly sharing pancakes. The radio hummed softly in the background, playing a classic tune from the 1960s. Henry remembered that song. He had danced to it once long ago, before the war changed everything. The memory brought a small smile to his face. Outside, the sun began to rise higher, casting golden light through the diner windows. It lit up Henry's face, showing the deep lines of experience and time. Each wrinkle told a story, of battles fought, friends lost, and a life that had been anything but easy. Yet there was peace in his eyes, the kind of peace that only comes after surviving storms. Henry looked around the diner with quiet gratitude. He liked this place because it reminded him that not everything in the world had gone bad. Here, people still said thank you, still held doors open, still greeted each other with a smile. In a world that often felt divided, this small diner was a pocket of warmth and kindness. He took a sip of his coffee, hot and strong, just the way he liked it. He looked out the window and watched the town come to life. The mailman making his rounds, a boy riding his bike to school, a couple walking their dog. It was ordinary, but Henry loved the ordinary. After years of chaos and uncertainty during his service, peace felt like a luxury. As he turned the page of his newspaper, his eyes caught a headline about veterans. It spoke about the challenges many of them faced after coming home. Henry sighed softly. He understood those challenges better than anyone. The world moved on quickly, but for some, the war never truly ended. He folded the paper and stared at his reflection in the window for a moment, wondering how so many years had passed so fast. Lydia returned with his breakfast, setting the plate in front of him. "Here you go, Mr. Collins," she said kindly. "Looks perfect as always." Henry smiled. "You're too good to me." "Lydia," she shook her head. "You earned it, soldier," and gave him a gentle pat on the shoulder before walking away. As Henry began to eat, the bell above the diner door jingled. He didn't look up right away. He was focused on his food. But he noticed the sudden shift in the air. The laughter that followed the entrance was loud, careless and out of place for such a peaceful morning. Henry glanced up briefly and saw a group of young men walking in. They were dressed casually, full of energy, one of them wearing a leather jacket and chewing gum like he owned the place. Henry didn't pay them much mind. He had seen young men like that before, restless and loud, full of pride with little purpose. He went back to his breakfast, trying to tune out their noise. Lydia approached them with her usual warmth, showing them to a booth not far from Henry's. They talked loudly, joked in rough tones, and occasionally threw glances his way. Henry pretended not to notice. keeping his focus on the paper. He wasn't the kind to start trouble, but deep inside he felt that familiar tension. The same kind of instinct that told him when something was about to go wrong. Still, he stayed calm, telling himself it was just another group of young men blowing off steam. He'd faced far worse in life than words or noise. After all, this was his diner, his safe corner of the world. Nothing bad ever happened here, or so he thought. He finished his breakfast slowly, folded the newspaper neatly, and took another sip of coffee, unaware that this peaceful morning was about to turn into something unforgettable. In a few short minutes, one man's arrogance would test his patience, his dignity, and the quiet respect he carried with him everywhere he went. For now, though, everything was still, and the diner hummed softly with life. Henry looked out the window once more and smiled faintly at the rising sun, not knowing that this ordinary Tuesday morning would soon become the day the whole town would talk about for years to come. The diner door swung open with a sudden creak, letting in a burst of cold air that carried the faint smell of rain and asphalt. The peaceful hum of chatter and clinking dishes faded for a moment as everyone turned their heads. 3 young men walked in, laughing loudly, their voices sharp against the gentle calm of the morning. At the front of the group was Derek Malone, tall, broad-shouldered, and full of the kind of confidence that often came from ignorance. His leather jacket squeaked as he moved, his boots clattered against the tile floor, and the smell of cigarette smoke followed him like a shadow. Derek wasn't from this town, not really. He'd grown up 2 counties over, known for stirring trouble wherever he went. The people here had heard of him, a man with more pride than purpose, someone who tried to look powerful by putting others down. Behind him came his 2 friends, Ryan and Chase, younger and quieter, but clearly under his influence. They followed his lead, copying his smirks, laughing at his jokes, pretending to share his sense of superiority. To them, Derek was fearless, someone who didn't care what anyone thought. The kind of man they wanted to be. Lydia, the waitress, forced a polite smile as she wiped her hands on her apron and greeted them. "Good morning, fellas. Take any booth you like," she said kindly. Derek looked around, scanning the room like he owned it. His eyes landed on Henry Collins, still sitting at his usual booth by the window, quietly sipping his coffee. "Let's take that one," Derek said. Nodding toward the booth right next to Henry's, Ryan hesitated. "That's close to the old guy," he whispered. "So what?" Derek snapped. "He won't mind. He's probably half asleep anyway." They slid into the booth, their movements loud and careless. Lydia brought menus, but they barely looked at them. They kept talking, laughing, using crude jokes that made a few other customers glance up nervously. Henry tried to stay focused on his newspaper, pretending not to notice. He had dealt with loud young men before, in training camps, in the service, and in life. He knew the difference between harmless noise and real danger. Derek leaned back in his seat, stretching his arms wide. "Man, look at this dump," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Feels like a retirement home," Ryan laughed. "Yeah, old folks and bad coffee," Lydia, who was setting down a plate for another customer, shot Derek a sharp look. "If you don't like it, you don't have to stay," she said calmly. Derek smirked. "Relax, lady. We're just having some fun." Henry turned a page in his newspaper, but his hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from frustration. He had lived long enough to know when respect was missing, and nothing angered him more than seeing it disappear from young faces. Derek noticed him then, the way a predator notices movement in the corner of its eye. "Hey," he said loudly. "You hearin' this, Grandpa?" Henry looked up slowly, his calm eyes meeting Derek's sharp, mocking grin. "I hear plenty," he said softly. "Maybe you ought to lower your voice a bit, son." For a second, silence filled the room. Derek blinked, not used to being told what to do, especially by an elderly man. Ryan and Chase exchanged awkward glances, waiting to see what he'd do next. Then Derek chuckled, shaking his head. "Lower my voice? You serious?" Henry nodded gently. "Yes, sir, this is a small diner, not a bar." Derek leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You must think you're somebody important, huh? What's with the jacket? Now you play soldier once upon a time?" Henry didn't respond right away. He just looked at him with that same steady expression, the kind that unnerved bullies without saying a word. Lydia stepped closer, sensing trouble. "That's enough," she said firmly. "You either behave or you leave," Derek scoffed. "We're customers, lady. We can talk if we want." Then he turned back to Henry. "So, old man, you gonna tell me why you're wearing that jacket? Or you just trying to get attention? Henry put down his cup and folded his newspaper. His movements were slow, calm, and deliberate. That jacket, he said, represents 30 years of service, son. And the freedom that lets you sit there running your mouth. Ryan looked uncomfortable. Hey, Derek, maybe we should chill, he muttered. But Derek ignored him. His pride was already stung. Oh yeah? You think you're a hero or something? He sneered. You think I care what you did 50 years ago? The diner grew tense. The truck driver in the corner stopped eating. The young woman closed her laptop and Lydia froze near the counter. Everyone could feel it. The kind of silence that happens before something bad. Henry sighed quietly. He didn't want trouble, but he also wouldn't let disrespect go unchecked. You don't have to care, son, he said evenly. But you should at least have manners, Derek laughed coldly. Manners? Please, you sound like my old man, he said, slamming his fist lightly on the table. And I didn't listen to him either. Henry simply shook his head. That's a shame, he said softly. A man without respect for others ends up with no respect for himself. For a moment, Derek's smile faltered. There was something about the old man's tone. Calm, firm and fatherly, that struck a nerve, but pride wouldn't let him back down. He leaned forward again, his eyes narrowing. You better watch your mouth, old-timer. Lydia quickly intervened. Derek, please, not here, she said. Don't make me call the sheriff. Derek grinned again, trying to shake off the sting of embarrassment. Relax, we're just talking, right, Grandpa? Henry didn't answer. He turned back to his paper, choosing silence over anger, but deep down, everyone in that diner felt it. The balance of peace was slipping. The warm, calm morning had turned cold and uneasy, and though no one knew it yet, that small moment of disrespect was about to explode into something none of them would ever forget. Derek leaned back, smiling darkly. Guess he ain't got much to say after all, he muttered. His friends laughed weakly, but their laughter sounded hollow. Forced Henry, meanwhile, stared quietly out the window again. His reflection faint in the glass, he had faced men like Derek before. Loud, insecure, and desperate to prove something, and he knew that sometimes silence was the hardest answer of all. Outside, the sun climbed higher, bright and indifferent to the tension brewing inside. The diner, once filled with warmth, now felt heavy with the kind of stillness that warned of a storm. None of them knew it yet, but this was only the beginning. The calm before a slap would change everything. The sound of forks clinking on plates had faded, replaced by a heavy silence that clung to the air like smoke. Henry kept his eyes on his newspaper, pretending to read, but the words no longer made sense. He could feel the young man's eyes on him, sharp and mocking, and though he wanted peace, he knew peace was about to leave the room. Derek leaned forward, a smirk crawling across his face. So, old man, he said loudly, you really think wearing that jacket makes you special? His voice cut through the diner like a knife. Lydia froze mid-step, holding a pot of coffee. The other customers looked away, hoping to avoid being pulled into whatever was coming. Henry sighed, not out of fear, but disappointment. He had worn that jacket through jungles, deserts, and sleepless nights. It wasn't just Clotham, it was a piece of his life. Son, he said calmly, it's not about being special. It's about remembering, Derek chuckled cruelly. Remembering what? How to order breakfast on time. His friends snickered, but even they looked uneasy. Henry's quiet strength was unsettling. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from weakness. It came from experience, from knowing what real danger looked like. Lydia finally stepped in. That's enough. Derek, she said firmly, you're disturbing the other customers. Derek shrugged. We're just talking, lady, he said. Ain't that right, Gramps? Just talking. Henry folded his newspaper neatly and set it aside. He met Derek's eyes without flinching. Talking is fine, he said softly. But disrespect is another thing. That line hit Derek harder than expected. His smirk faltered for a second. He wasn't used to being corrected, especially not by someone who looked fragile compared to him. Disrespect? He repeated, pretending to laugh. You think I care about some old man's feelings? Ryan whispered. Hey, Derek, come on, let's just eat. But Derek ignored him. He leaned closer, elbows on the table. You think wearing a patch makes you better than us? Henry didn't answer. Instead, he looked down, took a sip of coffee, and said quietly, No, it makes me grateful. You'll understand gratitude one day, when you've earned something. Derek's smile vanished completely. The word earned stung like a slap. He had spent his whole life trying to prove something to his father, to the world, and here was an old man, sitting calm and composed, suggesting he hadn't earned anything. He laughed again, but the laughter was hollow. "You sound like my dad," he said, his tone sharp now. "Always preaching. Always judging." Henry looked at him, his eyes soft, not angry. "Maybe your father was trying to teach you something." "Don't you talk about my father?" Derek snapped, his voice echoing. The whole diner went silent again. Lydia set the coffee pot down, her hands trembling slightly. The truck driver shifted in his seat, ready to step in if things went too far. Henry stayed still, his expression unchanged. He had seen tempers like this before. Young men who fought everyone except themselves. "Son," Henry said slowly, "anger will eat you alive if you let it." Derek grinned bitterly. "You think you're wise, huh? You think you're better than me just 'cause you're old?" Henry shook his head. "No, I think I've just lived long enough to know how little anger gives you." For a moment, Derek didn't know what to say. He had expected the old man to shout back, to argue, to make it easy to hate him. But Henry's calm made him feel small. Exposed, his face reddened. "You think you can talk down to me?" he said through clenched teeth. "You don't know a damn thing about me." Henry's voice stayed gentle. "Then tell me who you are." Derek froze. Caught off guard, no one had ever asked him that before. Not his friends, not his parents. And he had no answer, he just glared at Henry, searching for something cruel to say. Something that would hurt him. Ryan tried again. "Derek, chill, man." People are staring. But Derek's pride wouldn't let him back down. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "Don't tell me to chill," he barked. "This old man started it." Henry didn't move. His composure made Derek look childish, and deep down he knew it. That only fueled his anger more. "You think you're tough?" Derek sneered. "I've seen guys like you always acting like heroes, like the world owes you something. Well, guess what? Nobody cares about your stupid stories anymore." The insult landed heavy in the air. Lydia gasped softly. The other customers looked horrified. Henry's face didn't change, but his eyes darkened just a little. Not with hate, but with deep disappointment. "Maybe not," Henry said quietly. "But you should care. Because men like me fought so you could have the right to be ignorant in peace." Ryan and Chase exchanged nervous glances. "Derek, dude, that's enough," Ryan said. "Let's just go." But Derek's pride was a wildfire now. He could feel his control slipping. The more Henry stayed calm, the angrier he became. He felt mocked by that silence, humiliated by that patience. "You think you're better than me?" He shouted again. "You're nothing but a broken old man sitting in a jacket full of lies." Henry took a deep breath. His hand trembled slightly, but he didn't speak. Lydia stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Derek, I'm warning you, you need to leave now." Derek turned to her, his face twisted with anger. "Or what? You gonna call the cops?" "Maybe I will," she said firmly, though fear flickered in her eyes for a moment. Everything stopped, no one moved. No one breathed. The air was thick with tension. Henry slowly reached for his coffee again, his voice low but clear. "You still have a chance to walk away, son. Don't waste it." That line hit Derek like a challenge. His pride couldn't take it. He laughed coldly, a sound that didn't belong in such a warm place. "Walk away?" "Nah, old man," he said. "I think it's time someone taught you to keep your mouth shut." The room's energy shifted. Lydia's heart pounded. Ryan whispered, "Derek, please don't." But it was too late. The moment had crossed from words to something darker. Henry looked up at Derek one last time. There was no fear in his eyes, only sadness. The kind that comes when a man realizes the world has forgotten respect. Forgotten decency, forgotten kindness. The air felt heavy. The light through the window dimmed behind a passing cloud. And in that charged silence, everyone knew. The storm was about to break. The diner felt frozen in time, every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft hiss of coffee, faded into silence. All eyes were on Derek Malone, whose face burned red with anger. He stood now, towering over the small booth where Henry Collins sat. The old veteran didn't move, he just looked up calmly, his weathered eyes meeting the young man's with quiet strength. Lydia's voice trembled as she spoke. "Derek, please sit down." But Derek ignored her. His fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tight. His friends, Ryan and Chase, watched helplessly. They knew that look. They'd seen Derek lose control before, but never like this. Henry set down his coffee cup gently. The handle made a faint clink as it touched the saucer. His voice was soft, almost too soft for the moment. "Anger won't make you stronger, son," he said. The words only fueled Derek's rage. "Don't you tell me what to do," he shouted, his voice shaking the quiet room. Henry sighed. "You don't have to prove anything to me," he said. Derek took a step closer, his boots echoing on the tile. "You think you're better than me," he yelled. "You think just because you wore that jacket people should bow down to you?" Henry's hands rested on the table, steady as stone. "No, I think people should just be kind," he replied. That sentence was simple, calm. Unshaken was the final spark. Derek's hand moved fast, faster than anyone expected. Slap. The sound cracked through the diner like thunder. Plates rattled, someone gasped. Lydia froze in place, her heart skipping a beat. Henry's head turned slightly from the impact, the side of his cheek already turning red. His newspaper fell to the floor in silence. Ryan stood up instantly. "Derek! What the hell, man?" he shouted, grabbing his arm. But Derek yanked away, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling. His face twisted between rage and shock at his own action. He hadn't planned it, it had just exploded out of him. Like all the years of bottled-up anger finally had somewhere to land. Henry didn't yell, didn't even raise a hand. He just sat there, his calm unbroken, slowly turning his head back toward Derek, his eyes, clear, sad, and unwavering, locked on the young man's face. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. Lydia finally moved, stepping forward, her voice trembling but firm. "That's enough. You get out of my diner right now," she said, her hands shook. But she stood her ground. Derek blinked, as if waking up from a dream. He was mouthing off, he stammered, his voice uncertain now. Lydia's face was pale with anger. "You just hit a 76-year-old veteran, you coward." Ryan and Chase stood frozen. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, muttering, "We need to go, man. You've gone too far." But Derek didn't move. He just stared at Henry, who was slowly wiping the corner of his mouth with a napkin. There was a faint line of blood, but the old man's eyes never left his. Henry spoke quietly. "I've faced worse than you. Son, it wasn't a threat, it was truth." And that truth hit Derek harder than any punch could. Derek's expression shifted in a flicker of doubt. Confusion, maybe even shame, but pride held him there. "Glued in place, you think I care?" he said weakly, though his voice cracked slightly. Lydia picked up the phone behind the counter. "I'm calling the police," she said. Ryan tried to stop her. "No, please." "Don't, we'll handle it." She glared at him. "No, you won't. Not this time." Derek's heart pounded in his chest. He looked around. Everyone in the diner was staring at him, their faces a mix of shock and disgust. The young woman near the window had her phone out, recording. The truck driver stood, crossing his arms, ready if Derek tried anything else. The world seemed to shrink around him. His ears rang, his hands shook. "It was just a slap," he said weakly, almost to himself. "He was disrespecting me." Henry looked at him quietly. "No, son, you were disrespecting yourself." That line landed deep. And Derek didn't know how to respond. He wanted to argue, to shout. But the old man's calm voice made his anger sound childish. The waitress's voice came through the silence again. "The police are on their way." Derek cursed under his breath and turned toward the door. But as he did, his eyes flicked back to Henry one last time. For the first time, he noticed something in the veteran's eyes. Not fear, not hatred, but sadness. It was the kind of sadness that came from seeing the world lose its manners. "It's heart." Ryan grabbed his arm. "Let's go, man. Before it gets worse." They hurried out, the bell above the door jingling, breaking the tense air with a sharp metallic sound. The moment they were gone, the diner exhaled collectively. Lydia rushed to Henry. "Oh my God, are you all right?" she said, her eyes wet. Henry smiled faintly, touching his cheek. "I've been hit harder," he said. "Don't worry." "I'm fine," she shook her head. "You shouldn't have had to go through that." Henry looked down at the napkin in his hand, stained with a faint red mark. "The world changes, Lydia," he said softly. "But some lessons never do." He reached for his phone, his fingers steady, and dialed a number from memory. It rang only once before a deep, confident voice answered. "Dad?" "Marcus," Henry said. "I'm all right. But there's been a little trouble." The diner went quiet again as Henry's calm voice carried across the small space. No one knew yet who Marcus was or how that one phone call would turn the tables entirely. Outside, the morning sun still shone, bright and indifferent. The same sun that had risen on peace now burned down on a town that would soon be talking about what had happened for years to come. Inside, Henry sat back quietly, his composure unbroken, the mark on his cheek already fading into the wrinkles of a life well lived. He wasn't angry, just disappointed, because he knew that somewhere inside that angry young man was still a boy who had never been taught respect. But soon the world, and Derek, would learn that you never truly know who you're dealing with, especially when the man you slap in a diner happens to have a son who commands the power to move mountains. And outside, the faint sound of sirens began to echo in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. The sirens grew louder in the distance, rising and falling like echoes of the tension still hanging in the air. The small diner that had always been a quiet place now felt like the center of the world. Customers whispered to each other, glancing at the door, unsure what to say or do. Lydia wiped her trembling hands on her apron, trying to steady herself at the corner booth. Henry Collins sat quietly, his face calm, his hands folded on the table. The red mark on his cheek was still there, but his eyes were steady, clear, deep, and strangely peaceful. He looked like a man who had seen storms before, who knew when to stand still and let them pass. He picked up his phone again and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he rarely used. The name on the screen read Marcus Collins. His thumb hesitated for a moment before pressing call. The line rang once, twice, and then a familiar voice answered. Strong and confident, Dad? Henry smiled faintly. Morning, son, he said softly. Morning. It's not morning here, it's barely 6, Marcus replied, his tone light but warm. You okay? You don't usually call this early. Henry hesitated, then said calmly, I'm fine, Marcus. Just had a little situation at the diner. The warmth in Marcus's voice faded instantly, replaced by alertness. Situation? What kind of situation? Henry chuckled quietly. Nothing I can't handle, just a young man who forgot his manners, that's all. Marcus's voice sharpened. Someone hurt you? Henry looked around the diner, the people still staring, the waitress watching him with worry, and finally sighed. He got angry and slapped me, that's all. But I'm all right. For a moment there was silence on the other end of the line, the kind that comes before something powerful. Then Marcus spoke, his voice low and steady. Did anyone record it? Henry looked up, nodding toward the young woman near the window, who was still clutching her phone nervously. Looks like someone did. Good, Marcus said. Dad, stay there. Don't leave the diner, Marcus, Henry began, but the line clicked. The call was over. Lydia stepped closer, her eyes wide. Was that your son? She asked. Henry nodded. Yes, he worries too much. She frowned. What does he do again? Henry smiled faintly. He works for the government. Lydia tilted her head. What part of the government? Henry's eyes twinkled. The part that doesn't like people hurting veterans, he said quietly. Outside, the flashing lights of a police cruiser appeared, painting the diner windows blue and red. 2 officers stepped out, one young and nervous, the other older and calm. They entered, the bell above the door jingling gently. Sir, we got a call, the older officer said. You the one who was assaulted? Henry nodded. Yes, but I'm fine, officer. The younger cop looked around. Where's the suspect? Gone, Lydia said quickly. He ran off right after it happened. But we have his name, Derek Malone. The older officer scribbled it down. We'll find him, he said. You sure you don't need medical attention, Mr. Collins, Henry replied. Henry Collins. The moment the officer wrote the name down, he froze for half a second. Collins. He repeated, his brows lifting. Henry nodded. That's right. The officer looked at him a little differently now. You wouldn't happen to be related to Marcus Collins, would you? Henry smiled. He's my son. The 2 officers exchanged glances. The younger one swallowed hard, suddenly standing a little straighter. Understood, sir, he said, his tone more respectful now. Meanwhile, a few miles away in Washington, D.C., Marcus Collins, the director of Homeland Security, was already moving. He stood in his office, still in his early morning uniform, staring at the paused video on his computer screen. Someone had already uploaded the diner footage online. It was grainy but clear enough. The image showed an elderly man in an army jacket being slapped by a young man in a leather coat. The slap echoed through the speakers. Followed by gasps, Marcus's jaw tightened. His aide standing nearby said quietly, Sir, it's already spreading. Social media's picking it up. There's outrage everywhere. They're saying he's a veteran. Marcus's voice was calm but sharp. He's not just a veteran, he's my father. The aide blinked. Stunned. Sir, your father? Marcus nodded, eyes still fixed on the screen. Get me everything on that man, Derek Malone. Yes, sir, the aide said quickly, already typing, back at the diner. Henry sat quietly as the officers took statements. Lydia hovered near the counter, trying to keep the place calm. The young woman with the phone stepped forward nervously. Sir, she said to Henry. I recorded it. Do you want me to delete it? Henry smiled kindly. No, sweetheart, don't delete the truth. Outside, the first news van had already arrived. Drawn by the police lights and whispers on social media, a local reporter stepped out, adjusting her microphone. Looking through the diner window, she had no idea the man inside was the father of one of the most powerful figures in the country. Meanwhile, in a dim apartment across town, Derek Malone sat on his couch, his hands still shaking. The TV flickered in front of him, showing the same video of his own outburst. His name was trending already. His phone buzzed nonstop with messages, some from friends, some from strangers, all saying the same thing. You're in trouble. What's the big deal? He muttered, trying to convince himself. It was just a slap, but deep down his stomach churned. Something told him this wasn't just a local story anymore. Then his phone rang, an unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Mr. Malone? A cold voice said. This is Agent Ramirez with Homeland Security. We need to speak to you immediately. Derek froze. Homeland Security? Why? The voice on the other end didn't soften. Because the man you assaulted this morning isn't just anyone. He's the father of our director. The line went silent. Derek's heart stopped. His breath caught in his throat. He dropped the phone. Staring blankly at the floor, the weight of what he'd done finally sank in. Back in the diner, Henry sat quietly, unaware of the storm building beyond those four walls. He looked out the window at the clear morning sky, sipping what was left of his cold coffee. Peace never lasts long, he murmured softly. Lydia looked at him, puzzled. What do you mean? Henry smiled faintly. When the truth wakes up, the world stirs with it. And far away in a high-security office in D.C., Marcus Collins watched the headlines explode, his father's name trending across every platform. He picked up his phone, his voice calm but firm. Find Derek Malone, he said. I want him in custody before the day ends. The calm morning that had started with a cup of coffee was now a nationwide story, and for the first time in years the world was about to learn that some men may grow old, but their honor never fades, and neither does the power of the sons who remember it. By the next morning, the quiet little diner in Virginia was no longer just a diner. It was a landmark, a headline, a story that had swept across the country like wildfire. What had started as a single act of disrespect had become a symbol of something much bigger. The video had gone viral overnight. Millions had watched the clip, the slap, the silence that followed, the calm look on Henry Collins's face, and the horror of the onlookers. People were furious, shocked that someone could hit an old veteran in broad daylight. The comments flooded every corner of social media. How could he? That man deserves justice. Find him. News vans now lined the narrow street outside the diner. Reporters stood with microphones, speaking into cameras as if they were at the scene of a national event. Lydia, the waitress, stood by the door, overwhelmed, trying to keep things in order. The regulars didn't come that morning. The diner was too crowded with strangers. Henry arrived quietly, wearing the same old army jacket, the same calm expression. He didn't care about the cameras or the noise. He just wanted his coffee, but as soon as he stepped in, the reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. Mr. Collins, how do you feel about what happened? Did you know your son called for an investigation? Do you want to press charges? Henry raised his hand gently. Please, he said, I'm not here to talk. I'm here to eat breakfast. The crowd fell silent for a moment. His tone was calm, but it carried the weight of quiet authority. Inside, Lydia wiped the counter nervously. Mr. Collins, she whispered, you're all over the news. They're saying Homeland Security's involved. Henry gave her a small smile. Marcus worries too much. He forgets his father's tougher than he looks. Miles away in Washington, Marcus Collins, the director of Homeland Security, stood in front of a screen displaying Derek Malone's file. The room was tense, filled with agents waiting for orders. Marcus's voice was steady but sharp. Derek Malone, he said, reading the name aloud. Age 29, no stable employment, multiple bar fights, prior charges for disorderly conduct. He paused, his jaw tightening. And now, assaulting a decorated veteran, my father. Agent Ramirez cleared his throat. Sir, local authorities already have a warrant out. We've tracked him through his car's license plate. Marcus nodded slowly. Good, but this isn't just about one man losing his temper. This is about something deeper. Respect, decency, the kind of values this country was built on. He looked at his team. Make sure the arrest is clean. No violence, no drama, just justice. Yes, sir, Ramirez replied. Back in his small apartment, Derek Malone hadn't slept. His phone buzzed nonstop. Threats, insults, and warnings filled his inbox. Every channel on TV showed his face. Every headline carried his name. Veteran assaulted in Virginia diner. Son of Homeland Security Director target of attack. His stomach twisted every time he saw it. He couldn't believe how fast his life had fallen apart. He threw the phone across the room, his heart pounding. It was just one slap, he muttered. Just one stupid slap. But the words didn't comfort him anymore. They felt hollow, meaningless. A sudden knock on the door made him jump. Mr. Malone, a deep voice called. Federal agents. Open up. Derek's blood went cold. He looked through the peephole. 2 men in suits stood outside, their badges gleaming. He opened the door slowly, his hands trembling. What do you want? Agent Ramirez stepped forward. Derek Malone, you're under arrest for assault and hate crime under federal statute. Derek blinked. Hate crime? It wasn't like that. I didn't even know who he was. Ramirez's eyes stayed cold. That's the problem. You didn't care who he was within minutes. Derek was handcuffed and led out into the daylight. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. He tried to hide his face, but it was too late. The image of him being escorted by agents was already being broadcast live. Meanwhile, in the diner, Henry sat in his usual booth sipping coffee. When the news came on the TV above the counter, the headline flashed across the screen. Derek Malone in custody. Lydia turned to him, her voice soft. They got him. Henry nodded slowly. Good, he said. Maybe now he'll learn something worth keeping. The reporter on the screen spoke about how Homeland Security had assisted in the arrest, though no one truly knew how deeply Marcus Collins had been involved. What people did know was that justice had come, and quickly. A few days later, Derek sat in a courtroom. Looking small and lost, his lawyer whispered frantically, but Derek barely listened. The moment the judge mentioned hate crime enhancement, he felt his stomach drop. From the back of the courtroom, Henry sat quietly, dressed neatly as always. He wasn't there for revenge. He was there because he believed in accountability. When the judge asked if Henry wanted to make a statement, he stood slowly. Everyone turned to face him. Cameras clicked quietly. Your Honor, Henry began, his voice steady. I don't want this young man's life destroyed. I just want him to understand what respect means. I served this country so people like him could have the freedom to grow, not the freedom to hate. Even the judge paused for a moment. Letting the weight of those words settle, Derek lowered his eyes. Ashamed after the hearing, Henry walked outside. Reporters surrounding him once again. Mr. Collins, how do you feel now that justice is served? One asked. Henry smiled faintly. Justice isn't served by punishment alone, he said. It's served when hearts change. That night, Marcus called him again. Dad, it's over, he said. He's facing real time. Henry took a breath. Don't be too hard on him, Marcus. His son frowned. After what he did to you? Henry's voice was calm. Son, punishment teaches fear, but forgiveness teaches wisdom. Marcus went quiet, and for the first time that day, he smiled. You never change, do you? Henry chuckled softly. That's why you do what you do. And I do what I do. Across the nation, the story became more than just about one slap. It became a story about grace, discipline, and the power of restraint. Talk shows discussed it, schools used it as a lesson in respect, and strangers sent letters to Henry, thanking him for his dignity. But Henry didn't care about fame or headlines. He cared that maybe, somewhere, one angry young man might see himself in Derek and choose to walk away instead of raise a hand. And somewhere in a small, dim jail cell, Derek Malone sat with his head bowed, replaying that diner moment again and again. For the first time, he felt something real, shame, and the slow, painful beginning of understanding. A week had passed since the courtroom hearing, but the echo of that slap still lived in people's minds. The story had stopped being just about a single act of anger. It had become something larger. A mirror showing how fragile respect and decency had become in a world that moved too fast. The diner was quiet again. The news vans were gone. The cameras had disappeared, and life had slowly started returning to normal. Lydia was back behind the counter humming softly to the radio, flipping pancakes with a kind of peace she hadn't felt in days. But every now and then, when the morning light hit the corner booth just right, people still turned their heads because that was his seat. Henry Collins' seat. Henry still came every morning just like before. His army jacket freshly pressed, his paper folded neatly under one arm. The bruises on his cheek had faded, but the story written on his face remained. A story of patience, courage, and forgiveness. When he walked in that morning, the usual hush fell over the room for just a second. Customers smiled at him now, not out of pity but respect. Some even nodded softly, like greeting a local hero. Henry never sought fame, but it had found him anyway. Morning. "Mr. Collins," Lydia said with her warm smile. "Your usual?" He smiled back. Wouldn't feel right starting the day any other way. She poured his coffee, the rich aroma filling the air as she walked away. Henry unfolded his paper and glanced at the front page. The headline read, "Young man apologizes to veteran he assaulted." He stared at it for a long moment, then took a deep breath. He already knew this was coming. He'd received a letter 2 days ago, written in shaky handwriting. The words were messy, but the emotion behind them was clear. "Dear Mr. Collins, I don't expect you to forgive me. I was wrong. I let anger make me someone I'm not. Seeing myself on the news, seeing what I did, why broke something in me. I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to try to be better. Derek Malone." Henry folded the letter and placed it in his pocket. He didn't need to read it again. He had memorized every word. Later that day, the doorbell above the diner door jingled softly. Henry looked up, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Standing there was Derek Malone, dressed in a plain gray shirt. His hair shorter now, his eyes tired but sincere. Behind him stood a local police officer, watching quietly. Lydia froze mid-step, her hand tightening around the coffee pot. "Is that—" she began. Henry nodded gently. "Yes." The officer walked over, speaking quietly. "Mr. Collins, Mr. Malone serving his community service at the Veterans Center nearby. He asked permission to speak to you, but only if you're willing." Henry looked at Derek for a long moment, his gaze steady and unreadable. Then he said, "Let him." Derek walked closer, his steps slow. His voice was quiet but full of emotion. "Sir," he said, "I came to say I'm sorry in person. I can't take back what I did, but I needed you to know I'm trying to make it right." Henry studied him carefully. The cockiness that had once filled Derek's face was gone, replaced by humility, by a kind of regret that words couldn't fake.
"Have you learned anything since that morning?"
Henry asked softly. Derek nodded. "Yes, sir, a lot. I work with veterans now. I hear their stories every day. Men who fought, men who gave up everything. I didn't understand before, but I do now." Henry leaned back in his seat, his expression calm. "It's not about understanding the past, son," he said. "It's about respecting the people who lived through it." Derek swallowed hard. "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to earn that respect." The diner was quiet again, everyone watching but pretending not to. Lydia's eyes glistened as she listened. The moment felt heavy but pure, not one of revenge, but of redemption. Henry finally stood up, his old jacket catching the light. He walked around the table and stood face to face with Derek. The height difference was clear. Derek, strong and tall, and Henry, smaller but unshakable, without a word. Henry extended his hand. Derek stared at it for a moment, disbelief flashing across his face, then slowly reached out and shook it. His voice cracked. "Thank you, sir." Henry nodded. "Respect is something you build one day at a time. You've started that work. Don't stop now." The officer stepped forward quietly. "Time's up, Malone." Derek nodded. "Yes, sir," then turned to Henry one last time. "I won't forget this." Henry smiled faintly. "I hope not." When Derek left, the diner felt lighter somehow. Lydia came over and placed a new cup of coffee in front of Henry. "That was beautiful," she said softly. Henry chuckled. "No, Lydia, that was necessary." As the day went on, news of Derek's apology spread again, But this time, people didn't focus on the slap. They focused on the handshake, the photo of the two men, one older, one younger. Shaking hands in a small-town diner became a symbol of healing. It appeared in newspapers, on TV, and across social media with captions like "Forgiveness is strength" and "Respect rebuilt." Back in Washington, Marcus watched the photo from his office. He smiled faintly and shook his head. "You did it again, Dad," he murmured. One of his aides asked, "Sir, do you want us to make a statement?" Marcus leaned back. "No need, the picture says it all." Later that evening, Henry sat on his porch, the sky painted orange by the setting sun. He could hear crickets chirping and the distant hum of cars on the highway. The world was peaceful again. He took the letter from his pocket, unfolded it, and smiled. He whispered to himself, "People can change, if you give them a reason to." And somewhere across town, Derek finished his shift at the Veterans Center, helping an old man with his wheelchair. For the first time in years, he felt proud of something. Not for what he'd done wrong, but for what he was finally doing right. The town slowly moved on, but the story of that diner, of a slap, a fall and a forgiveness one, would linger. It would remind people that respect isn't just earned by medals or power, but by how we treat others when no one is watching. And every morning as the sun rose over Virginia, Henry Collins would take his seat by the window, drink his coffee, and look out at a world he still believed in. A world that, despite everything, could still be good. Months had passed since the day the world saw that diner moment. The news stories had faded, the reporters had moved on to new scandals, and the world's attention had shifted as it always did. But in the small Virginia town where it all began, the memory of that morning still lived quietly in the hearts of the people. The diner had returned to its usual rhythm, the soft clinking of cups, the smell of bacon and buttered toast, the low hum of conversation. Yet something about it felt different now, gentler, warmer, as if the place itself had learned something from what happened. In the corner booth by the window sat Henry Collins. Just as he always did, his newspaper lay open in front of him. But he wasn't really reading. He looked out the window instead, watching the sunlight spill across the quiet street. His once red cheek was long healed. But the lesson that morning carried had become something much bigger than a bruise. Lydia brought over his coffee, her smile soft and fond. "Here you go, Mr. Collins," she said. Setting the cup down, Henry smiled. "Thank you, Lydia. You still make it better than any coffee I've had in the army." She laughed. "That's because I don't serve mine in a tin cup," he chuckled. The sound light and full of life. Then his eyes drifted to the far wall of the diner, where a new plaque hung, gleaming softly under the morning light. It read, "Reserved for Mr. Henry Collins, American hero. Gentle soul, example to us all." Beneath it was a smaller frame, holding a photo, Henry shaking hands with Derek Malone, both men standing in the same booth where it all happened. The picture had gone viral, printed in magazines, shared across social media, even discussed in classrooms. For many, it had become a symbol of how forgiveness could rewrite even the darkest of moments. Henry looked at it quietly for a moment, then turned back to his coffee. "Funny thing about forgiveness," he said softly. "It heals the giver more than the one who receives it." Lydia, wiping down the counter nearby, looked up. "You did something most people couldn't," she said. "You forgave him," Henry smiled faintly. "Maybe, but it wasn't about him, Lydia. It was about me." "What do you mean?" she asked. "I've seen too much hate in my life," he said slowly. "In battlefields, in streets, even in hearts. It grows fast if you feed it, but if you meet it with patience, with decency, it dies quietly. That's the real fight, Lydia. The one most people don't see outside." The town had started calling the diner Collins Corner. It wasn't official, but everyone used the name anyway. School children came by sometimes with their teachers, asking to meet the veteran who forgave the bully. Henry always smiled and told them, "I'm no saint, kids. I just chose peace when anger knocked." One afternoon, as the sun began to set, a black SUV pulled up outside the diner. A tall man stepped out, wearing a suit and a gentle smile. Marcus Collins, Henry's son. He had been to the diner only once since the incident, but today felt different. When he walked in, everyone turned to look. Lydia greeted him warmly. "Good to see you again." "Director Collins," he smiled. "Just Marcus today. Please." Then he walked over to his father's booth. You still sitting in the same spot? Henry grinned. Old habits. Son. Marcus sat down across from him, setting his phone aside. You've made quite the name for yourself. You know, Henry shook his head. I didn't make anything. The world just needed a story that reminded it what decency looks like. Marcus nodded. Derek Malone's been doing well, by the way. The Veterans Center says he's one of their best volunteers. Henry's eyes softened. Good, he said. I hoped he'd find something worth standing for. Marcus hesitated, then said quietly, You know, Dad, when I saw that video for the first time, I wanted to destroy him. I wanted to use every bit of power I had to make him regret it. But then I watched the way you looked at him. Calm, steady, without hate. And I realized you were teaching me too. Henry chuckled. You were always a quick learner. Marcus smiled. No, I was just lucky to have the right teacher. They sat together in silence for a moment. The kind of silence that didn't need words. Outside, the evening sun painted everything gold, the light falling on the plaque that bore Henry's name. After a while, Marcus said, You know, Dad, people still talk about that handshake. It changed the way a lot of folks see things. Henry nodded slowly. Good, maybe the next time someone feels angry, they'll remember two men who chose a handshake instead of another mistake. As Marcus got up to leave, he placed a small envelope on the table. Before I forget, a letter came for you. It's from Derek. Henry opened it after his son left. The handwriting was neater this time. Steadier, the letter read, Mr. Collins, it's been months since I first met you again, and I just wanted you to know I'm still keeping my promise. I volunteer 5 days a week now, and I talk to young people about what happened. I tell them how anger ruined one day of my life, but how your forgiveness gave me a whole new one. I can't thank you enough for that handshake. You didn't just forgive me. You showed me what kind of man I still had a chance to be. Respectfully, Derek. Henry folded the letter carefully, his eyes misting. He looked out the window where the sun was dipping behind the trees, and for a long moment he just sat there quietly thinking. The bell above the diner door jingled again, and a group of young men walked in. Laughing and joking loudly, Lydia looked up, a hint of worry flashing across her face. But Henry only smiled. Let them be, he said softly. They're just young, they'll learn. He watched them for a moment, then turned back to his coffee. His reflection in the window looked older, yes, but also lighter. A man who had faced hate and met it with grace. Outside, the world moved on. But in that little diner, the lesson remained, whispered in every pour of coffee and every quiet smile shared between strangers. That strength is not in the hand that strikes, but in the heart that forgives. And as the night settled, Henry Collins sat back in his booth, watching the stars appear one by one, a faint smile touching his lips, because deep down he knew that one act of kindness, in a world hungry for anger, could still change everything.